Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Chris Bishop and welcome to this CNBC Africa special live broadcast. The Senegal IMF conference themed this year, Sustainable Development and Debt, Finding the Right Balance, is going on as we speak in Dakar, the capital. Sub-Saharan Africa has been facing a dilemma between financing development needs and addressing debt vulnerabilities. And this conference, jointly organized by the IMF and the government of Senegal in partnership with the United Nations and Circle of Economists, will engage a wide group of stakeholders in a dialogue on their respective roles in supporting sustainable development in sub-Saharan Africa. We can now cross live to Dakar on the conference's opening ceremony by being hosted by the President of Senegal, Macky Sall. Let's hear his opening remarks.
And who makes us all Africans very proud. About 6 years ago, we used to give advice to our heads of state. Our heads of state now mostly have degrees. They are very highly educated and they know what we are talking about. And we are happy to entrust them with the task of defending our interest. President Macky Sall will deliver his welcome remarks. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alain Foucault. You have already warned us we should not be surprised. That's a journalistic provocation, of course, I agree. But I'm sure it will help us to discuss very effectively today. Your Excellencies, dear colleagues and brothers, heads of state, from Benin, Patrice Talon from Burkina Faso, Marc Christian Kabore from Côte d'Ivoire, Alassane Ouattara from Niger, you have Mamadou Youssoufou from Togo, for Nyasimbe, Mr. Prime Minister Bobo Cissé, from Mali, Madame the Director General of the IMF, Kristalina Georgieva, Madame Amina Mohammed, Deputy Secretary General, United Nations, Mr. Vice President of Africa Region of the World Bank, Mr. President of the Cercle of Economists, ladies and gentlemen, the presidents of the institutions of the Republic, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, honorable ministers, excellencies, ambassadors, dear participants, dear guests. I would like at the outset to once again welcome the heads of state of our heads of state of our countries, African countries, who have honored our invitation to this international conference. My dear brothers, thank you very much for coming to this meeting. Your participation is testimony to our common ambition to together pursue our objectives of sustainable development in the spirit of solidarity and dialogue with our partners. To you and all the participants, I wish you a very warm welcome to the land of Teranga. I'd also like to welcome and thank Madame Kristalina Georgieva for her participation and especially her first official visit to Africa in her capacity as the Managing Director of the IMF. Thank you very much, my sister Kristalina. My sincere greetings and wishes of success in the discharge of your delicate mandate. And I'd like to also thank my sister Amina Mohammed, the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations for her presence. And I'd also like to thank our brother Affairs Janet of the bank for his participation, and also to the Circle of Economists for their very dynamic partnership in helping organize this conference. In organizing this meeting on the theme of debt and development, this is an opportunity to exchange in depth and to seriously talk about an issue that has always been and will remain important in terms of economic policies. Indeed, in the history of our nations, the issue of the debt of states has always created a lot of discussion and controversies, both among specialists and within the public opinions. The problem is still very topical in all our countries, and more critically also in developing countries, in view of the huge and urgent needs in terms of investment for the present and the future. Africa is still a good example. By 2050, the population of the continent will double to be more than 2 billion. It is 1.3 billion today. This doubling of the African population in just one generation will make this continent one of the foremost resources of manpower in the world. Hence, the need to speed up our move towards development. I said this is an opportunity because in order to take advantage of this demographic dividend, we need to invest and invest again and invest more and more. We need to invest in education and training for qualified and skilled for human resources that can satisfy the needs of the market, to undertake to create activities that can create jobs and wealth. Invest also and massively in physical infrastructure and material infrastructure. Just in the strategic area of infrastructure, and infrastructure investment needs $150 billion per annum, whereas the resources we devote to such investment is just about 75 billion. That is half. Africa is looking for emergence. Or almost, and everything has to be built. Our continent is today like an aircraft about to take off. It needs all its energy, a strong force, in order to lift off. And in order to deal with the resistance. Resistance for us is poverty. We also need a runway, a very strong runway. A big aircraft needs a solid runway to take off. And of course, otherwise the takeoff will not be successful. So we need to conquer poverty, and therefore we need to mobilize our internal domestic resources, and we're aware of this. Countries should do their best in order to increase their revenues, but also we need to be able to attract a long-term investment in order to succeed in this emergence. We are not asking for the rules to be changed in our favor. but we want to have the
L'endettement n'a
same
jamais été
opportunities.
en soi un problème.
Debt has not
Dès
really
lors
been
qu'il est
a
un
big
endettement
problem
responsable
if it is
qualité.
responsible, if it's
C'est-à-dire qu'il
based on
finance
quality.
l'économie
That is,
productive,
if it's
source
finances
de croissance, de
productive
développement et de bien-être
industry, which
En ce
is a
sens,
driver of growth.
la
And
dette
in
investie
that sense,
dans des
the
secteurs qui
debt
génèrent en
invested
retour
in
plus
sectors
de
that
capacités
generate resources
productives
and more
crée
productive
par elle-même
capacity will
les
itself
conditions de
create
son
the
remboursement.
conditions for that debt to be serviced.
Mais au-delà
But beyond
de
this,
l'économie,
beyond this
au sens
economy,
strict,
strictly
il y a la
speaking,
question
you
essentielle,
have the essential
je dirais même
issue
vitale,
and vital
du
issue
financement
of
de la sécurité.
financing
Le
security.
présent et l'avenir
Present and
ne
future
pourraient se concevoir
can only
sans sécurité.
be based
Il
on
n'y a pas
security for
d'État
success to
sans
follow.
sécurité.
You cannot have a state
Il n'y a
without
pas
security.
De liberté
You cannot
sans
have
sécurité.
freedom without
Il
security.
n'y a pas de démocratie
You cannot have
sans
democracy
sécurité.
without
Il ne peut pas y
security.
avoir de développement
And you
sans
cannot
sécurité.
have development
Nul
without
besoin
security.
d'insister sur le défi
And
sécuritaire
there's no need
que
to
nous impose le
overemphasize
terrorisme,
the need
l'extrémisme
for
violent
security
et les
imposed
trafics
by violent
transfrontaliers de tous genres.
extremism and
Trafic d'êtres
all
humains, trafic
forms
de drogue,
of trafficking,
repris
drug, human
en
beings,
activité dans la région.
and
Et l'Afrique n'y échappe pas.
Africa is
Et la
suffering
situation
from
au
all
Sahel
that.
en
And
dit
the
long.
situation in the Sahel is very eloquent.
Or, à l'échelle individuelle,
At the individual level,
comme à l'échelle collective,
just
le
as
réflexe
at the
naturel
collective
de
level,
tout corps
the
agressé,
reflex of
c'est de se
any
défendre.
person who has been attacked is to defend
Comme le font
himself
tous les
or
pays
herself.
exposés au péril
As
terroriste.
countries
Là
have been doing,
également,
those
l'Afrique ne
exposed to
peut faire
terrorism.
exception.
And here again, Africa is not
Face
an
à des
exception.
groupes terroristes
In the face
armés
of
et déterminés
armed terrorist groups who are determined
à faire main basse sur des
in
pays
order
entiers,
to
l'investissement
hold
dans les capacités de
countries
riposte
hostage. We
des
therefore
forces de
need
défense et de
to
sécurité
invest
devient
in our capacities to
non pas une
respond.
option,
This is no longer an
mais un
option.
impératif,
It is an imperative.
existentiel.
It is an existential
une question de
imperative.
survie.
It's a matter of survival.
C'est le cas déjà de beaucoup de pays
Is the case of
dont les chefs
many
d'État
countries
sont présents ici.
whose heads of state are present.
Face à une
here.
agression,
In the face of
tout pays
an
est
aggression,
obligé de s'équiper
every
pour
country
se défendre.
has to
Il nous faut
equip
donc
itself to
trouver,
defend itself.
mesdames
We
et messieurs, les
therefore, ladies and
mécanismes
gentlemen, we have to find
afin de prendre en
mechanisms
compte la
in order to
situation
take into
exceptionnelle
account the exceptional
où des
situation
ressources en principe
and
dédiées au développement
resources
sont
devoted
déviées
to
à l'effort
development
sécuritaire,
now have
pour ne pas
to
dire à l'effort
be
de guerre.
channeled to
Et c'est
a
l'une des
war
problématiques
effort. And this
que
is
vous
the
posez cette
big
conférence.
issue that we also need to discuss in this conference.
Il y a ensuite le défi de
You
la
also
société
have
du savoir
the challenge
fait
of
de la
the
science, de la
society of
technologie
knowledge, science
et
and
de
technology
l'innovation
and
de
innovations
puissants leviers
which are
de croissance
more and
économique
more
et de développement.
important for economic
Pour être au
development
rendez-vous
and
de
economic
la
growth.
société du savoir,
We need to be
l'Afrique ne doit pas se
there.
satisfaire du concept vague de dividende
Africa should
démographique.
not just talk about the concept of
L'Afrique doit valoriser
a dividend.
ce
We need
facteur
to develop
en
those
investissant dans
factors
son
by
capital humain
investing in the
par une
human
éducation
capital
et une
through
formation de qualité
education and training, good
qui
quality
contribuent
education, and
autant que
which
les
will contribute
infrastructures
as much as the
au progrès des
infrastructure
nations.
to the progress of our
D'autres
nations.
investissements d'avenir
Other investments
peuvent
in
aussi
the future
atteindre nos pays lorsqu'il s'agit de nous préparer au
are
rendez-vous,
also necessary for us
de nous
to be
préparer à des
prepared
rendez-vous inédits.
in the
C'est
future.
le cas du Sénégal.
This is the case of Senegal
Et probablement
and
d'autres pays
probably
africains
other African
en passe de
countries
devenir des pays producteurs de
talking
pétrole et de
about
gaz naturel.
producers of oil
Un
and
de nos
gas.
défis
One of our challenges
pour tirer un avantage
in
optimal
order to
de
make
ces
the
ressources,
most of these
c'est sans
resources
doute de faire
is
des prises de participation
also
dans l'exploitation des ressources
pool
aux côtés
our
des sociétés partenaires.
resources and develop our
Nous avons
national
dans le champ
corporations.
Sangomar,
We have in the
sud-est, au
Sangomar,
sud du pays,
in the south
peu avant la
of
Gambie,
Senegal, close
un
to
champ
the Gambia.
pétrolier.
We have an oil field.
Nous avons également un champ
We
gazier
also
à la
have a
frontière
gas
avec
field
la
on the
République
boundary with the
islamique de Mauritanie.
Islamic Republic of
On
Mauritania.
partage.
We share.
Et la prise de participation
And through this
pour
sharing
l'exploitation de ces gisements
to
exige
explore
ainsi des
these
ressources
resources. But this
considérables
requires
qui ne sont
considerable
pas toujours
resources
disponibles
which
au
are
plan-
not always
au plan budgétaire.
available in our budgets.
Malgré toutes les stratégies de
Despite
mobilisation
all
des
the
recettes et tous les efforts
resource
internes,
mobilization
il nous
strategies,
faut donc,
we need,
si nous ne voulons pas rester uniquement
we
à capter des royalties,
do not want to just
prendre une
depend on
part active dans
royalties.
l'exploitation
We
des ressources,
need to
ce qui
participate
naturellement
actively
demande
in the
des
exploitation
moyens
of the
importants, pour
resources
l'instant
and invest
estimés entre 1 milliard et
enormous
3
amounts,
milliards de dollars.
maybe
nous
between
projette
1 and 3
Dans
billion
l'association à au
dollars.
moins 20%.
We need to
Autrement,
participate
Je pense que
and
nous aurons
pay for at
encore
least
des portions beaucoup moins
20%.
significatives sur l'exploitation de ces
So
ressources.
we need to do that in
Il y a
order to
donc
properly
lieu, c'est un
explore our
exemple que je donne, de
resources.
faire appel à
And
des
I
financements externes
always talk
suivant
about
les bonnes
external
pratiques
resources
d'autres
according to the best practices
pour ne
of
pas
other
nous
countries
contenter
in order not to
uniquement,
be
je l'ai
simply
dit, de royalties
satisfied with
et de portions
royalties.
Voilà un autre aspect
So
du
this is
financement
another
des politiques
aspect of
publiques qu'il
financing
nous faut
of
prendre
public
en
policies that we
considération
need to take into account
dans la quête de
in
l'objectif
the
de
search
développement durable.
for sustainable development.
Chers collègues, mesdames et
Dear
messieurs,
colleagues,
ces dernières
ladies and
années,
gentlemen, in the last few
l'Afrique
years,
a enregistré
Africa
une forte
has
augmentation
registered a
de
high
son niveau
increase
d'endettement.
in its debt.
Selon les indications du
According
Fonds monétaire,
to
le
the
ratio de la dette publique
monetary
africaine
fund, the
est ainsi passé de
debt
35%
ratio is
en moyenne au début
35%
des années 2000
in the
à
years 2000 to
55% du PIB
55%
en 2016.
in 2016 GDP.
Et sur la même séquence
Now,
temporelle,
in the
la
same,
tendance
in the same
haussière a
time
été observée
frame,
au niveau global.
globally,
beaucoup plus
the
important.
trend is upward.
L'endettement public et
The
privé
public and private
au niveau global
debt,
a atteint
the
en
global
2018
level
un
in
niveau record de
2018, record level
184 000
of
milliards,
184
184 pour parler comme les
billion
anglo-saxons, 184 000 milliards de dollars
dollars.
américains, soit
That is
225% du PIB mondial.
25% of global GDP. In
de
Africa,
55% du PIB.
55% of
Surendettement de
GDP.
l'Afrique.
This is the
Donc on voit bien
debt
que sur
ratio
la
of
dette,
Africa.
l'Afrique n'est pas
And you
une
can see
exception.
Africa is not an exception with
réalité,
respect to debt. In
Ce
reality,
qui handicape le
what
continent,
hampers the continent
ce sont surtout les
is
préjugés
especially the prejudice
et le regard
and
stigmatisant
the stigma
posé sur lui
on
lorsqu'il s'agit
Africa
d'investir
when
en Afrique.
it is a matter of
La
investing in
perception
Africa.
du risque
The
est
perception
toujours
of
exagérée.
risk is
Les
always
notations
exaggerated,
sont exagérées.
and our
Ce qui a pour conséquence
ratings are
immédiate
very
le
low.
renchérissement
And
du
the
loyer
consequence
d'argent
is that
et le
the
renchérissement
rent
naturellement de
of money
l'investissement.
is higher, and also the same
Or, à
for
vrai dire, le
investment.
risque en Afrique n'est pas
And the risk in
plus
Africa,
élevé
actually,
que dans d'autres régions du monde.
it's
je le
not
dis
higher
souvent,
than in other
quelles que
areas
soient
of
les
the world.
difficultés,
Whatever the difficulties,
Africains payent leur
Africans pay, they service their
Malgré tout
debts.
cela.
We pay
Ensemble,
our
il nous faut
debts
donc
back.
rechercher les
So
moyens
we
de
need to
déconstruire
together
cette
look for
perception
the ways and
largement
means
répandue
of
en matière
debunking this
d'investissement et
perception
d'endettement de l'Afrique.
about Africa's
D'autre part, il
indebtedness.
n'est pas rare
And
que des
also, it is
critiques
not rare
s'élèvent
for
contre le
people
gouvernement
to criticize our governments
dette est
and saying
aujourd'hui
that
un fardeau pour
the
les
debt
générations
is a
futures.
burden for
On entend
our
ce
future
discours
generations.
au
We always
quotidien.
hear people talking about this.
Les pays s'endettent.
The countries are
Or,
becoming more and more indebted.
Une
Yet the
dette
fact of the
soutenable
matter is
est
that a
moins
sustainable
une affaire de
debt
solidarité
is
intergénérationnelle
less
que
a matter of
l'utilisation des ressources à
intergenerational
des fins de
solidarity
développement,
than the use of
d'une part,
resources for
mais
development.
aussi de solvabilité de
And
l'État, d'autre part.
the
C'est-à-dire si on a la
the
capacité
country's solvency
pour
it depends
mobiliser
on the capacity to
des moyens
mobilize
pour rembourser les
resources
emprunts, je
to
vois pas où est le problème.
service our debts. If we can do that, where is the problem? It's not a matter of saying it's the future generations that are going to pay. We're not going just leaving for the future generations a huge debt. We are also leaving a lot of infrastructure. And the assets that we have acquired with the debt will be here. We need to strike a balance. I'm talking about the debt used for development for the future. I'm not talking about debt for just for operational purposes. That is bad debt. So in any case, these basic issues today are unavoidable if we want to make sure that Partnership for Development prospers. How do we finance our investment today and in the future without endangering the financial viability of our states in the medium and long term? What level of public deficit, what level of indebtedness for our countries in our current state of development? This is an issue that is on the table. Obviously, this debate is not just a criticism of our partners, not at all. We need to sit around the table and discuss. These are matters of common concern for all of us, and it is after discussing all these ideas that we will be able to reach conclusions that will enable us to make progress. We are together, multilateral, bilateral partners and states. We are all indeed in the same boat. Therefore, I was saying that we need to be fair and balanced. Can we apply the same convergence criteria for developing countries where they have a lot of work to do, and apply the same to developed countries who have already completed their capital accumulation process? It is very relevant to ask these countries, should the UMO countries have the same criteria as European countries? 3% budget balance, etc. These are major issues. This is the issue. The debt ceilings determined here and there. Should they be applied to UMO? Are they relevant today? It's not a matter of going into an adventure of becoming recklessly indebted. That is not the case. We want to implement innovative projects in our countries. So these are a few examples and a few issues that I wanted to put on the table here at this conference. However, I'd like to reassert in this friendly spirit and atmosphere in the country of Teranga, we need a friendly atmosphere. We need confidence in each other, in our relations with our partners, bilateral and multilateral partners. And therefore, we need to also have a sincere and open debate, and calmly, in a spirit of confidence and friendship. This is what I wish for this conference. And finally, what we are looking for here is to contribute in a concerted manner to the advent of an innovative global governance that will facilitate access to resources to finance development, especially the sustainable development of goals, while respecting the rules for sustainability of our debts and fiscal sustainability of our states. And I declare on this note this conference on the development and debt, finding the right balance. And thank you for your kind attention.
Je vais essayer de rester dans la convivialité.
Okay, I will try to remain in this spirit of friendship and be polite to everybody, because this is the land of Teranga, and the spirit of journalism should be, I think, abandoned for a moment. And I'd like to invite here the person who is coming to Africa officially for the first time and who replaced somebody I knew very well, Christine Lagarde, and who today has done us the honor of coming to Africa to discuss all these matters. Kristalina Georgieva.
Kristalina Georgieva, la directrice générale du Fonds monétaire international.
Of the International Monetary Fund.
Bonjour.
Good morning.
I would like to first turn to His Excellency President Macky Sall to express my deepest gratitude for bringing us all here today, and recognize the heads of states and government, the leadership of the United Nations, World Bank, other development organizations, for being not only here, but here in a spirit of impressive unity of purpose. They deserve a round of applause. I would like to express the deepest respect I hold for everybody on this stage, and my happiness to be in Africa very early in my mandate. Je suis très heureuse d'être avec vous
very happy
aujourd'hui.
to be with you today.
We are partnering with the United Nations and with the Circle des Economistes for a discussion on the best way to pursue the aspirations of all Africans for a prosperous and sustainable future, and what role that can play. How to make sure this role is positive rather than undermining that future. And since President Macky Sall started from the point of the spirit of Teranga, I actually would like to stick with this analogy for a little while. We know that Teranga is demonstrated every day by everyone in Senegal, and I felt it from the moment I stepped on Senegalese ground and I was welcomed by members of the cabinet. I felt that spirit. We also know that Senegal has been quite famous for the success of the Lions of Teranga, Senegal's national football team. It has done miracles to mobilize the energy and dynamism of this nation. And it actually is teaching us a lesson about the balanced approach President Macky Sall talked about. What the team demonstrates is that in every game, they need to balance the urge to attack and the need to defend, the individual brilliance and performance with this one of the team. And that is what we need as an approach to address sustainable development in a balanced way, to address that need for ambition for growth and that sustainability to be kept in balance. So finding that right balance, this would be the focus of my remarks today. Let me start from the economic scoreboard of Africa. We have seen tremendous improvements based on strengthening institutions, investing in infrastructure, and the most precious capital of the continent, its people. As a result, over the past decades, extreme poverty levels have declined by 1/3. Life expectancy has increased by 1/5, and real per capita income has grown by about 50%. This is a demonstration how concentrated, powerful development efforts can lift up the continent and make it the place for investors to be. And I will come back to that point, President Macky Sall, of how we project investment opportunities and risks in Africa. We also recognize that for the people in Africa, what is achieved is great, but what do they want? They want more. And they want also more attention to some of the very significant challenges that they face. Think of the farmers that are faced with devastating impact of climate change, or the young women and men who are struggling to acquire the right skills for the economy of the future. And the millions of new jobs that need to be created, some 12 to 13 million every year, so new labor market entrants can have the satisfaction of jobs and the dignity of looking after their families. So to achieve all this, we need to scale up investments and we need to scale up social spending to meet the sustainable development goals. And it is therefore clear to all of us that the advancements to be done require more energy so we can be moving forward to meet these goals that Amina Mohammed so ably led us to formulate. Where are we? We are halfway to the SDGs. And we can say this is a really big problem, or we can say this is a fantastic opportunity to tackle. We can use many instruments for that, and as President Macky Sall said, that is one of them. Borrowing does make sense if it is done wisely, if it finances projects that can boost productivity and living standards, if it materializes on the grounds of more roads. I saw the airport, fantastic, more airports, more schools, more hospitals, more opportunities. But room for borrowing in the region is not endless. We now know that after a period of fast growth of borrowing, debt levels have stabilized. They have stabilized at around 55% of GDP. What is important to recognize, it has been done primarily on commercial terms. 2/3 of debt today is non-concessional. And that means that the cost of this debt, even at the time of low interest rates, is relatively higher, meaning that more has to be spent to service the debt, and therefore less would be available for the key social purposes. So we have to be clear that while borrowing on its own is not bad when it goes for the right purpose, countries cannot borrow their way to the SDGs. They need to play the way the Lions of Teranga play, in a balanced manner. So what does that mean? I would share with you 3 powerful tactics that are in the spirit of this balanced approach. One, I'm not going to surprise anybody on stage or the audience, is to generate higher public revenues. Rely more on yourself than you rely on others. This is still an area where Sub-Saharan Africa can do more. We estimate that revenue collection is 3 to 5 percentage points of GDP below revenue potential. With a GDP of $1.7 trillion, it is easy to calculate what 3 to 5% would mean to boost investment potential in Sub-Saharan Africa. We are very dedicated in the fund to work on this. Very recently, we have engaged with Uganda, where streamlining the value-added tax and harmonizing administrative procedures have led to increasing revenue to GDP ratio from 11% in 2012 to 15% today. And I do believe we can do a lot together in that regard. When we also look at raising revenues, I was impressed to see the toll road here. When we have a fair way to charge fees for services provided, that gives the government more opportunity to invest in the future. And we also have to address something that is more and more top of mind, and this is another form of fairness, the fairness of international corporate taxation. We have to see more of this being in the purse of countries where revenues are being generated. Second tactics, make investment spending more efficient. So here is the reality today. Out of public investments, we actually get 60 cents to the dollar. In other words, we can boost the efficiency of public spending quite significantly, concentrating on the quality of projects, the quality of supervision of their implementation, the overall efficiency of public spending. And I know that my institution would be right there with you, boosting this from 60 cents to the dollar to dollar for the dollar. That is where we want to be. And the third tactics is to strengthen public debt management. I often say that transparency in debt financing is the citizen's best friend. And we are united with the World Bank to work with the countries so debt management can be efficient and debt can be transparent for everybody to see, the lenders and the borrowers, in order to improve, again, the ability of debt financing to provide a boost to growth. We are ourselves committed to provide more resources. We are now able to boost financing on concessional terms, including zero interest rate terms. And I can tell you, with my colleagues in the IMF, we are absolutely determined to make more of this funding available to Sub-Saharan Africa. Now, let me go to a point that is absolutely crucial, and it is not only to talk about the teams in Africa, but to talk about our global team. What do I mean? For one, advanced economies can do more, especially when it comes down to concessional financing, to aid. We know what the goal is, 0.7% of GDP from advanced economies to go to support development, and we are not there by a long mile. We are still at around only 0.3%. So the global team has to do more. We also have to see how new global platforms, how the use of technology, of the digital economy, can accelerate the flow of financing into sub-Saharan Africa. And I want to recognize immediately a very fair point that President Macky Sall made about the perception of risk in sub-Saharan Africa. Yes, there are areas where risks are high, but there are also areas where opportunities are high, and yet we have not been able to communicate sufficiently Africa as an investment destination. I want to praise Compact with Africa. It is doing some of it, and we have to do more. We have to dispel the perceived riskiness of investments in the region, including by providing more up-to-date data on investment climate and steps that have been taken, more than 100 reforms to make it possible for foreign and domestic investors to do their job without red tape. Congratulations to the countries that have done that. Now we need to do our job to amplify that message. We also have to concentrate as a global team on the most significant obstacles to development, and among them, access to electricity is one I want to recognize. No electricity in the 21st century cannot be a picture we are comfortable with. So for us, the critical issue ahead is how to make all possible avenues from blended finance to targeted private sector investment attraction to working on the remaining red tape in Africa, so we can see all possible sources of growth fully exploited, sustainable development, sustainable finance, sustainable debt for a sustainable future. And let me finish with a proverb I learned from Senegal that I like very much, and it goes like this: whatever one person can do, two people can do even better. Imagine, just imagine what we can achieve or if all of us work together. So that is the spirit of the Alliance of Teranga. That is the spirit that brought us here in Dakar. That is the spirit we are going to go with. And may that spirit bring the brightest future for Africa. Thank you.
Alors, si on va avancer dans cet esprit, la journée va être formidable puisque tout le
in that
monde est d'accord.
spirit, it would
On va
really
travailler
be wonderful
ensemble dans
because
l'esprit de la
everyone
Teranga,
agrees.
main dans la
We
main.
work together in the spirit of
s'embrasser
solidarity of
Et
Teranga,
tout ira
hand in
bien, on va
hand, and
nous
everything will
accorder
be
ce qu'on
well.
attend, ce que tout le monde espère. En tout cas.
And we can reach
Et
what
on va donner
everyone
la
is
parole
hoping for. We're now going
à
to give the floor
une autre grande partenaire de
to
développement, qui est une
another
sœur,
major
qui nous fait
development
l'honneur d'être
partner
là,
who has
qui
honored us
est
with her
Madame
presence,
Amina Mohammed, qui est la
Mrs.
vice-secrétaire
Amina
générale des Nations
Mohammed, who
Unies,
is the
que je vous
Deputy
demande
Secretary
d'accueillir
General of
ici avec des
UN.
applaudissements.
And please welcome her with a big round of applause.
Thank you. Your Excellency, President Macky Sall, Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, ladies and gentlemen, it really is a great pleasure to be in Dakar, Senegal, to speak on an issue that is critical for the achievement of both Agenda 2063 and Agenda 2030. I'm extremely grateful to our hosts, the President of the Republic of Senegal and the new Managing Director of the IMF, for bringing us together to discuss progress on this area, but also the opportunities. I applaud their leadership and would also like to take this opportunity to welcome my sister of another mother, Kristalina Georgieva, as the head of the IMF on her first outing, which is here, to Africa, and in particular on her focus on climate action and on gender-related issues. As we all know, sustainable development and sustainable debt are interconnected. This recognition has allowed policymakers to address the issue much more effectively, especially in the context of economic policies on the continent of Africa. Excellencies, Africa, as we've heard, is a land of opportunity with great potential to benefit from its large and youthful population, growing markets and abundant resources to achieve the 2030 agenda and that of 2063. Many African countries are among the world's fastest growing economies. But the challenges of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals are daunting. Investment needs in key infrastructure and social services are huge. Reducing inequalities and addressing climate change are critical, as is harnessing the capacities of our young people, empowering our women, and investing in peaceful societies, building resilience. The 2030 Agenda envisages new and additional financial flows into countries to allow rapid expansion of our gross domestic product. The assumption is the larger the GDP, the larger the tax base will be. And in the long run, countries will be able to rely more on domestic resources for public investments. Yet, financial flows into developing countries, especially those in this continent, are far short of what is required to reach the targets of the SDGs. According to the estimates of the IMF, SDG investments in education, health, roads, power, water and sanitation alone required in low-income countries to spend on average an additional 15% of GDP by 2030. And in Africa, estimates of SDG financing needs range from $616 to $638 billion annually. Conventional ODA is not filling these gaps. In fact, official development assistance in developing countries has shrunk at an unprecedented rate in recent years. Even when countries do receive ODA, it continues to be earmarked and tied. As a result, with little or no FDI, countries in the developing world are left with little or no choice to go for loan financing or other debt instruments to fund development projects, which they need for the SDGs. And this has led to a sharp accumulation of debt. Average public debt in Africa is close to 60% of GDP, up from 41% in 2013. A growing share of public expenditure is used to service debt, competing with scarce resources that would otherwise be invested in development. Developing countries today spend an average of 12% of their revenue on external debt payments, double what they did in 2010 in Africa, with a large and growing young population. In Africa, this population, the lack of investment in education and health, will have a serious negative implications for long-term growth and SDG achievement. Changes in the composition of debt further exacerbate our challenges. Commercial financing and lending by non-traditional creditors, together with access to international financial markets, have provided welcome additional funding, but they are more costly and more exposed to global financial market volatility. In addition, external debt with variable interest is also growing rapidly. In least developed countries, floating rate debt represents a third of total external debt, greatly increasing exposure to economic risk. Excellencies, as the scale of these complex challenges are becoming clearer, the international community will need to strengthen its engagement. Lessons from the past, such as the challenges countries faced from the debt crisis in the 1990s, will prove invaluable if used to inform new strategies. We need to ensure that history does not repeat itself. We need strong political will from African countries and the commitment of international partners to address the structural issues that constrain sustainable development financing in Africa. And we need to encourage innovative debt instruments and mechanisms. Today's conference is responding to a newfound urgency in overcoming these challenges. Our economic solutions are running way behind the present challenges, such as the global social unrest, inequalities, conflict, and climate change. Our discussions on debt sustainability should not lose sight of investing in sustainable development. Here I would like to offer 4 points that I hope will contribute to the deliberations. First, the narrative of debt has to change. We have to recognize that debt is not inherently bad. What matters is how the money is spent and the country context. Several African countries have borrowed to invest in critical infrastructure like transport and energy, while others have spent on development-related current expenditures such as health and education, which has improved human development indices. Many African countries are at the early stages of their development, where their investment requirements are very high, especially to meet the needs of the SDGs. At this stage of development, debt will rise and debt ratios will deteriorate. Let me just say here that the context matters. The context of climate change. Africa, with just 2% of the emissions, is carrying the burden and the cost of climate change. And that needs to be considered when we look at the opportunities, but also at the mitigation and adaptation for it. We also need to see here where conflict exacerbates our development, much more political will in the international community for investing in peace and the transitions to sustainable development. What is important in Africa is to establish credible and sound macroeconomic policies, good governance, strong regulatory frameworks, and institutions to implement inclusive social impact investments while creating that fiscal space to service debt. The creditor here, second is governance, and strong institutions will be needed to ensure that the capacity of governments to partner with the international financial institution and other new partners to implement the Addis Ababa Agreement. The creditor and debtor communities need to be held mutually accountable. This also implies the transparency, because governments are also accountable to the people, as are international financial institutions to international standards. We need to see much more transparency, internet transparency. We should call for transparent laws that are easily accessible to all citizens and government. Third, we need to examine the potentials of instruments such as debt swaps and debt restructuring, where the potential for aligning or linking with the SDGs will have multiplier effects in the society. Currently, there are proposals for small developing countries, for small island developing states, for climate-related debt swaps. Fourth, the impact of debt financing on future growth and revenue mobilization also underlines the integrated nature of financing and sustainable development. We are encouraging countries to adopt integrated national financing frameworks, which can help to align finance policies and approaches from tax investments, aid and debt with national priorities. Excellencies, we will need to move forward urgently and support countries to better manage debt and to leverage FDI, without which the implications will include missed opportunities for our young people, climate action, women empowerment, conflict resolution, our humanitarian crisis, and the nexus between development, peace, and security. I trust that today's conference will generate further momentum from the legitimate concerns about this crisis to tackling it head-on in the spirit of solidarity with the people of Africa. I thank you.
Le ton est donné et les débats sont déjà engagés, comme vous avez pu vous en rendre compte. On constate que les paradigmes ont considérablement changé, puisque là on parle franc, et on parle direct et il n'y a pas de condescendance. Alors là, je vais passer la parole à quelqu'un qui a particulièrement travaillé pour que cette conférence se tienne, qui est le président du Cercle des économistes français, mais je ne voudrais pas le faire avant d'avoir remercié ceux qui étaient à la manœuvre pendant toute cette période pour préparer cette conférence. Je dois en oublier quelques-uns qui me pardonnent, mais je voudrais quand même qu'il y ait des applaudissements pour le docteur Cheikh Kanté, qui était la cheville ouvrière de cette conférence, qui a beaucoup voyagé pour que cette conférence se tienne, naturellement sous les instructions de son président de la République. Il ne fait jamais rien sans dire le président Macky Sall m'a dit de faire ceci. Il ne peut pas y couper, ça, c'est plus fort que lui. Je vous demande d'accueillir M. Jean-Hervé Lorenzi, le président du Cercle des économistes, qui va décliner ici le
President of the Circle of Economists, who is going to tell us what we'll be talking about during the day.
Merci. Toujours de rester dans l'état d'esprit très
Thank you. To remain in this very friendly frame of mind, let me start by thanking President Macky Sall, the Director General of the IMF, the Deputy Chair, Deputy Secretary General of the UN, the Vice President for Africa of the World Bank, for having assisted us and helped us to organize this conference. I would just like to say, on behalf of the Circle of Economists, that three words come to my mind: pride, the word pride, the word audacity, and the word emergency. And I think that those are the elements that the President and Director General focused on in their intervention. Pride, we are proud to participate in this day. It is incredible, and it is coming, and I need to say it. It stems from an introduction at the economic meeting we held in Aix-en-Provence, where we had the honor to welcome President Macky Sall, who came, and he was invited by Mrs. Duflo. It was the first time that we're talking about inclusive growth. And on that day, we say that one day we'll talk about inclusive growth, how, where, when, and it was probably with you, Mr. President, and this is one of the major reasons why we're meeting here today, was because of that first introductory session, which was very innovative for us. And then you asked us to ask all members of the Circle to think of ways of working together. A year later, we met with Mrs. Lagarde, Mrs. Christine Lagarde, Mrs. Lagarde, the Director General, the former Director General, and she told us it is a wonderful idea and we should address that theme, whose title has changed, but the spirit remains the same, and we should meet in Dakar to hold a meeting. And Senegal, as you said, Madam Director General, is a good example of inclusive growth. It is a model for many of us, for many countries, and it is in fact the reason why we're meeting here today. And I hope that we'll meet often here, because you are an exceptional authority in this area. The word audacity, we are in an economic situation, a global economic situation that the IMF described as being very special. The usual path followed by the world economy is not similar to what we experienced in the past decades. We have interest rates that are that we economists find curious. It is almost unique in the history of rates of interest rates for decades, and we do need to try and reflect.
And that's the opening remarks coming to you from the international conference here in Dakar, Senegal, hosted by the presidency of Senegal, the International Monetary Fund, the Circle of Economists, and the United Nations. We've had conversations from the President Macky Sall of Senegal. We've also had Kristalina Georgieva, the new Managing Director of the IMF, and also Amina Mohammed, who is the Deputy Secretary of the United Nations.